no ads, earlier content, ask me questions, and even get a Discord call with me to help with your game. These are all on my Patreon right now. Hello everybody and welcome back to the basics of AI. If you remember last time, we had our character basically randomly run around until it got close enough to the door, in which case it opened the door. But of course, it's a very uncontrolled AI right now. It kind of moves around however it wants, which means testing it can be very difficult. I mean, I cut it out of the video, but as you can see, trying to get the AI to go to the door was a pain in the butt because it's doing random movements. So today, we're gonna work on setting up a system so that way you can kind of control where the pawn goes. In order to do this, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna head over to the blueprints, or not even blueprints, but rather the AI folder. And I'm actually gonna create a separate blueprints folder within AI because I feel like AI stuff is kind of categorized different than like props and other actors. I'm gonna go into that blueprints folder and now I'm gonna create a class. It'll just be an actor and I'm gonna call this BP Patrol Point. Now these don't have to be used in a way that is for patrolling, but they can be, and I just think it's a good name for what we're gonna be using it for. I'm gonna open that up. It's actually gonna be a very simple thing. The first thing we're gonna do is we are going to type in the word sphere. We want a sphere collision. What we're gonna do is we're actually gonna bring that sphere collision up just a little bit. It doesn't have to be a lot, something like 60, just so it sits on top of the ground and it's easier to see. And I'm gonna take that sphere radius, maybe bring it up to like 64, raise this up again just slightly, something like that, because this collision isn't actually going to be used for the purposes of collision. It is a visual cue for us, and you'll see why here in just a moment. And then we are gonna add one more thing. Just type in the word arrow and add an arrow, and then just bring it roughly to where the center of the sphere is. Mine's at 90, so we can just bring this up 90, and now it's there in the center. So the reason you add the arrow to the sphere is so that way you know which direction the blueprint is facing. This can be incredibly useful if, let's say you have a cliff and you want the AI to look over the cliff. Well, if you just put a patrol point at the edge of the cliff, if the AI approaches from a weird angle, it could be looking off the cliff kind of to the diagonal, or maybe even parallel with the cliff. So by knowing which way the patrol point is facing, we can use that information if we need it. And that's all we're gonna do. We're gonna hit save and compile for now, leave it open. But I'm gonna go ahead and drop one into the map so you can see kind of what we created. So you can see here now we have a patrol point, and it's very easy for us to see. Of course, if I hit play and we look down, it's not actually there. This patrol point merely exists in the editor for us to look at. If you need more precision, by the way, you can just use this icon. This is the exact location of the patrol point, or you can lower the sphere size. I'm not really looking for super precise movements, so this works fine for me. However, now we need to get this data, this patrol point, to our pawn, more specifically to our pawn's brain. So we're gonna use the game instance to make that happen. Now, I don't know if you guys have ever used a game instance before. If you're new to the Unreal Engine, learn everything you can about the game instance. The game instance is incredibly important. It is the thing that is going to save you a ton of performance hassle and a lot of ways to get blueprints to be able to communicate with each other. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna go back to the content folder. I'm gonna go into blueprints and I'm gonna create a new folder, and I'm gonna call this systems. Within systems, we are going to right click and we are going to create a blueprint class. And down here at the bottom under all classes, I'm going to type in game instance, and you'll see that there's platform game instance and just game instance. We do not need platform, so just click the top one. You can name yours whatever you want. However, I'm going to name mine my game instance. I usually name it something related to the game, like the game's title _ game instance, something like that. But for now, my game instance works, and I'm gonna open that up. And you'll see it's just a blank blueprint. There's nothing inside of it. Well, we're going to add stuff to it that is going to be game-wide. Think of the game instance as a pseudo way of having global code. Now, you don't want to overfill your game instance. It needs to be as slim as possible, but at the same time, don't be scared to use it. I know you hear a lot of this stuff in game dev where it's like, do it, but don't, but do it, but don't. And unfortunately, it's one of those things where it's the best way to say it until you fully understand why you use the game instance and why you might avoid it. My recommendation Anytime you hear the do it but don't, do it as much as possible until it breaks so you understand what's going on. Of course, don't do that on a project you're doing with, you know, other people and stuff like that, but on your learning projects and first projects, break stuff. It's the best way to learn how things work. Anyway, what we're gonna do is we're gonna create a new variable, and we're just gonna call this patrol points, and I think you know where this is going. We're going to change that variable type to the BP underscore patrol point. That will be an object reference, and if you right click the little dot here, it'll turn into a grid. That means it is an array. That means it's a list. An array is a list. And now we're going to create a custom event, and we're going to call it add patrol point, just like that. And we're going to add a input. That input is going to just be called patrol point, and the input type will be, you guessed it, the patrol point, and that will be an object reference. This time, not an array, just an object reference. With that set up, hit save and compile. Now, what we're gonna do is we're gonna pull out the patrol point from the variables and get a get. We're gonna pull out of that and we're gonna do an add unique. Now you can do just add. However, we never want duplicates in this array, so it's better to just do add unique. Technically, if you're coding perfectly, it will never add an instance more than once, even if you just do the add. Add unique is just an extra barrier, right? It's saying, hey, only add stuff that needs to be in here. And then we'll take the patrol point input and put it into there. Now, as always, we're gonna comment our code because commenting is way more important than beginners ever give it credit for. But you know what? Just like I said, you know the do it, don't do it speech I just gave? Don't comment your code. Don't do it. See what happens. If you're one of those people that needs to get burned to see why something is important, don't comment. But I'm telling you, for those that want to listen or don't need to get burned to learn something, just follow along with me on the comment. Call this event when adding a patrol point to the game instance. So basically, instead of our blueprints reaching inside of the game instance and manually changing the game instance's variables, you create an event that does it instead, so that way all blueprints have control over their own variables. Oh, and for the record, I'm one of those people that has to get burnt to learn things. So if you feel like you're getting called out, it's because I see me in you. I see me in you. Anyway, now we need to get our game to actually use this game instance. In order to do that, we need to go to our project settings. Mine's already open. If yours is not open though, just go to edit and then project settings. Of course, mine's open. So I'm just gonna go ahead and click here. And believe it or not, all we have to do is go up to the search and type in game instance in 2 different words. And you'll see that we have game instance class. All we need to do is open that, and you'll see that mine here, the my game instance, is already an option. So we're gonna select that. So now our game is using the correct game instance. Do not worry, the default one is empty as well. So it's simply all we've done is created our own. Now we're gonna head back to the patrol points blueprint. And on the event graph, we're gonna delete everything except the event begin play. If you did delete the event begin play, here's a tip. Hold P and click and you'll get that event begin play back. There are other ways to do it, but that's my favorite. We're gonna create a custom event though, and we're gonna call this custom event get game instance ref. The ref means reference. What we're going to do is we're going to pull out of that and we're going to cast to my game instance. The object will simply be get game instance, and out of as my game instance, we're going to simply promote to a variable. Now on the as my game instance, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit F2 and I'm going to rename this to game instance ref, just like that. And of course, I'm going to create a comment, get a reference. Oh, did I spell that wrong? Yeah, a reference to the game instance. And we'll go ahead and attach that to the event begin play. Also, if you wonder why I don't just attach this code directly to the event begin play, is because whenever you start attaching all this kind of code to the event begin play, it gets very messy. It's better to have events that get called, so that way I can very easily remove huge chunks of code that do one specific task from the event begin play, or add that code back to the event begin play by simply adding one node It keeps the code clean and makes your life a lot easier. Now we're gonna create another custom event, and we're going to do alert game instance. This is my own naming convention. I don't know if alert is used for anything else. So in a way, this could be an incorrect naming convention if the word alert is used for something I'm unaware of. This is how I like to name it. But anyway, alert game instance, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna pull out of the alert game instance. What we're gonna do is we're gonna grab the game instance ref, we're going to get the game instance, and do you remember the event we created, add patrol point? We're going to call that. So we're gonna add patrol point, just like that. But you'll note that right now there's nothing connected to patrol point. So something that you can do is actually pull out of that patrol point and just type in the word self. And now what you have is a event that tells the game instance, hey, this patrol point exists. And we're gonna add that to the end of our event begin play. So now we have a dynamic system, because if you think about it, this being in the BP patrol point, no matter how many we add, it's going to add itself to the game instance at the very beginning of the game. So now we can just place patrol points in our level and they'll automatically be added to that array of patrol points. Now, obviously, if you need more control over what patrol points for what monsters in certain areas, you can do that, but for right now, we're not too worried about it. So I'm gonna grab this, we're gonna create a comment at the beginning of the game, add ourselves to the array of patrol points in the game instance, just like that. And now we'll hit save and compile. So that's pretty much all the patrol point needs to be. So I'm gonna go ahead and close that blueprint. And now our game instance has access to all of the patrol points on the level. So perfect. But how do we get our AI to know of the existence of these patrol points? Well, we'll use the AI controller. So what we'll do is we're going to create a variable called patrol points. And that variable type, if you can guess, will be, of course, the BP patrol point, and that will also be an array. So right click on that little dot, save and compile. Now, what we're going to have to do is essentially the same thing we did in the patrol point blueprint. We're going to get the game instance ref. We are going to cast to my game instance. The object will simply be get game instance. And of course, we will then promote it to a variable. And we are going to just rename it game instance ref, create a comment, get the game instance reference. Then we'll go to the top here and we are going to get the game instance. And in fact, I have forgotten about something that we need to be doing. So anytime you get the game instance, I know this is going to sound silly, and there's other use cases for this as well, but the game instance is probably the primary one. We need to press D on the keyboard and click. That's going to get us a delay, and we're just going to leave it at 0.2 seconds. Now, you might be wondering why we delay on the event begin play before getting the game instance. The reason for this is we do not know the load order for our game, which means that if this blueprint is loaded in first and the level starts, there's a good chance it might try to access the game instance before it's even loaded in. You also need to consider the fact that each patrol point needs to add itself to the array. Thus, it'll be a little bit more processing time. Luckily, 0.2 seconds is plenty of time when it comes to like loading things. So we're gonna run the behavior tree, we're gonna delay by 0.2, and we're just gonna get the game instance ref and then get our patrol points. In fact, I lied. We're even gonna put this delay right before we run the behavior tree. Now you might be wondering, why did I just make that flip? And we're gonna get the game instance before we run the behavior tree as well. The reason I just made that flip is in my own mind, I went, well, if we run the behavior tree and it tries to access a patrol point, if it doesn't currently exist because it hasn't loaded in or the 0.2 seconds haven't passed, it's going to get an error. So we're gonna delay, get the game instance ref, and then run our behavior tree. Save and compile, and actually, let's do it in the patrol point as well because it's good practice and we should be doing it anyway. However, you'll note that on this one, what we're gonna do is we're actually gonna change this one to 0.1 instead of 0.2. Don't worry, that's still a good amount of time, so we'll know that the in-game instance is in. However, we want this to happen before the AI controllers happens, because again, those patrol points have to let themselves into the game instance, and then we will be able to retrieve them. So we're waiting 0.1 on this one and 0.2 in the AI controller. This stuff might seem complicated, but I promise it's not as bad as you think. You'll get used to it. Anyway, back in the AI controller, now that we have the game instance ref, we can go ahead and create a new custom of it and call it get patrol points. What we're going to do is we're going to get the game instance ref. We are going to pull out of that and type in get patrol points. And now you'll see we have access to that array. We're not changing the array, so this time accessing the variable directly is fine. Then out of patrol points, we are going to for each. Now, we're going to run a for each loop. If you don't know what a for each loop is, it's basically saying for each item in this array, we need to do something. So what do we need to do? Well, we're going to get our patrol point array specifically in the AI controller. So not the one in the game instance, but the AI controller's patrol points. And we are going to add unique. The loop body basically means every time this for each loop goes, what do you want to do? Well, we want to add unique. What are we going to add? The array element. So what it's saying is for each item in the game instance's patrol point, I want you to add a unique reference to my patrol points. And that reference will be whatever the current array element you're on is. So it's going to take the patrol points and add them to this patrol point. Now we're going to grab it. We're going to make a comment, update the available patrol points on the map for the AI controller. Then of course, we'll need to add that to the very end of our event begin play. Well, not the very end, but at least before the behavior tree so we don't get any errors. So we're going to get the patrol points. And after we get the patrol points, we can now successfully run the AI tree because it will be able to access that data that it's going to need. Save and compile. So now we're over in the behavior tree. Now, I'm going to leave it pretty much the same, except over here, we're going to get rid of the random location. And instead, we're going to go up here to new task. We're going to do the blueprint base. We're going to go into the tasks folder, and I'm going to name it bttask _ get random patrol point. Now later we can add in a way for it to be a specific route, but for now we're just going to do random patrol points. And of course, any task, it starts with the event execute or event receive execute AI. However, you'll remember that whenever we're talking to a generic thing, so we don't know what specific AI controller is going to be accessing this task, what the behavior tree looks like, stuff like that, we need a blueprint interface in order to talk and send a generic request. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my content browser. I'm going to go to BP interfaces, and I'm going to create a new one under the blueprints tab with blueprint interface. I'm going to name it interface _ get patrol point. Now, here's the thing. I know we're doing random, but we're going to be able to use this whether it's random or not. So simply getting the patrol point works fine. If you remember from the last episode, the task specifically does not need the interface. However, the AI controller will, because it's the thing that's going to be receiving the generic request. So we're going to click on class settings in the AI controller. And on the right-hand side, under the implemented interfaces, I am going to add interface _ get patrol point, and I'm going to save and compile. However, we also need to open up the interface, and we need to name this function. I'm just going to call it send patrol point, like that, and I'm going to hit save and compile, and we can close that. So now whenever we have the owner controller, which of course is a generic call, so we don't know what variables it has, now we can just send the generic BP interface request of send patrol point. So it's essentially saying, hey, I got this task, so I'm gonna need you to send the patrol point to the behavior tree. And luckily, that's as simple as it gets. Now we just pull out of this and we type in finish execute. And that will of course be a success, and we can save and compile. Very easy task to set up. So now what we'll do is we'll close this and we'll return to the AI controller. So now that you might want to save and compile again, by the way, I think, in order for that interface to work how we need it to, since we updated it. Anyway, now we need to set up what happens when we receive that generic request. Well, when we right click and type in send patrol point, you'll see that we have event send patrol point. So now it received the request. Hey, just so you know, generic request, we need you to do a thing. Well, in this case, we know it's random, and we can set up the logic different if we don't want it to be random. But for now, it's random. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna get our array of patrol points, and out of the array, I can literally just type in the word random, and it'll say, hey, here's a random array item. And if you remember working with an AI controller, we can right click and just simply type in get blackboard, and down here at the bottom, we have an actual reference to whatever the current blackboard is. So we can pull out of that and hit set value as vector. So we'll plug that in, but you'll note that obviously we can't plug in the random patrol point into the vector because it's getting a patrol point, not a vector. So in order to go about that, what we're going to do is out of the top pin, which will be the patrol point, we're going to get world location. And in this case, we can just do the default scene route. There, I did a little organizing. And normally you'd plug the world location directly into the vector value, or would you? The thing is, if you remember from the last episode, we used a node called get random point and navigatable radius. So we're actually going to use that here. And you might be wondering why we are going to use this node. Well, the reason for that is because let's say whenever we place the patrol point, it just so happens to be in a location that it can't reach. Maybe it's 1 pixel above the ground, 1 pixel in the ground. Essentially, we could accidentally place it somewhere the AI can't get to, then you get errors, the AI crashes, no bueno. But if you get a random location and navigatable radius, and then just use the patrol point as the origin of that random location with a very small radius of something like 20, then what's going to happen is it's still going to go to the patrol point, but it has about 20 units of freedom to be able to move around and not be at that specific location, meaning it's got a much less likely chance of failing. So then we plug this into the set value as vector. We set the random location into the vector value. I'm even going to create a pin for this so that way we can more easily add another node here, because we're also going to need the key name, which if you remember is make literal name, and this is the name of the variable on the blackboard we're wanting to change. So let's go double check its name. Target location, no space. So we'll type in target location, no space, press enter, hit save and compile. So now let's go over the full process. Whenever we're not near a door, we're going to pull out a task here that we just created of getting a random patrol point. Whenever this gets called, the AI controller receives a generic message from the blueprint interface that says, yo, do a thing. And its response is to look into its patrol points, grab a random one, and say, hey, this is the location of the route of this blueprint. It gets a random location within 20 units of that route, and then updates the blackboard with the location of that random location as target location, which then, of course, the next step for the blackboard is to move to the target location. So you can see how this is going to work. Let's go ahead and go into our map, and let's add just a couple of these around the corners. Right now, their direction doesn't matter. In order to duplicate, by the way, I'm just holding Alt when I start dragging. And so now what's gonna happen is the AI is randomly gonna walk to these 4 points if everything is set up correctly. Let's hit play and see if we did it correct. So if you followed along exactly, yours also received an error or just didn't work. Well, I found out what the error was. Do you remember the delays we added? Well, in this case, we needed to add a slight more delay. If we go to the AI controller, you'll note that I've increased mine to 0.3, and with that 0.3 in place, now whenever I go to my third-person map and hit play, you'll note now the AI successfully navigates to the random path points. And there it goes. I should also mention I also did this instead. If you remember, this is in the AI controller. For the get patrol points, we did a for each loop. If yours is working, then don't worry about it. But something else I did is I just set the patrol points variable to the array in the game instance. I don't think it'll matter. This should be the exact same thing, but thought I would throw that in there because it was a difference. This is why the delays are important, and it's kind of interesting that it happened here. I'm glad that you guys got to see it in action, like it actually not working very well without those delays. So if you've done a lot of troubleshooting and you can't figure out what the problem is, consider that maybe it is indeed the amount of delay in the load order. Also, you'll note anytime it goes near the door, it immediately chooses a different patrol point. If you remember, it's because how the behavior tree works. If it gets near the door, it kind of cancels its current action, opens the door, then picks a random path point again, like you just saw. However, we know that that's happening, and that's perfectly fine. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode of the basics of AI. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode. Today's Indie Ally shout out goes to Frazier. I know I just gave one to Frazier, but he released his game on Steam, specifically the demo, completely for free, named Lethal Dose. Now, I'm not sure if the demo has it, but it does have its own built-in level editor, and for him to include that, I think is really cool. I'll provide a link in the description, and if you want to end up at the end of one of my videos, or just join the Discord and join a group of your peers, I'll leave a link to the Discord in the description.